I've been meaning to share this story for a while now, but we've been busy making the move to our new home. With all the unrest going on, we decided to get away. Our new place is deep in the rural South, far from any large cities where violence could break out. I included this bit of information because it makes a great segue to what I'll be talking about. I'll not beat around the bush any longer and get to my story. At this time, my husband and I had only been together a few years. We'd made the choice to get settled before beginning a family. We were living in a big northern city, one no different than any other in the early 2000s. Crime was on the decline, especially the violent type, but we still had areas known to be a little rough. The two of us had been on the lookout for a small neighborhood bar to buy. Nothing we found had appealed to us until we came across this little dive in one of those rough neighborhoods I mentioned. It had all we wanted except for a high crime rate. We hadn't noticed the police station across the street before the owner pointed it out. We were sold after that. I mean, no one is going to cause trouble with cops just across the street. Never mind that a large amount of the clientele were cops. What could go wrong? Right? The sale went through with no problems. We soon became the proud owners of a prospering business. Despite never having owned a bar before, we were handling it pretty well. My husband had the idea to turn the storage room into a little kitchen for small things like burgers and sandwiches. Within 2 weeks, our income had almost doubled. We were even able to hire a part-time cook. Things were only getting better. Then the shooting started. Around 1 a.m. One night, a regular of ours, a police detective, was leaving the bar and heading for his car parked across the street. As he crossed, an unknown car sped past him and opened fire. He was unfortunately killed instantly. There were no witnesses to the murder. As you can imagine, his fellow officers were furious. They were going over his cases with a fine-tooth comb, looking for any reason to explain the attack. A few months passed, and no real leads had been found. Everyone hoped it would be an isolated incident, most of all, us. We didn't want the bar to get a reputation for being dangerous. Just when it was starting to look like it may never be solved, 2 more officers were attacked. Another pair of detectives, just yards away from our door, were cut down in a drive-by. It was a miracle no one else was hit. Thankfully, neither officer was severely injured. They were both able to make quick recoveries and give their counterparts enough information to find the shooters. I say shooters because it turned out to be a pair of brothers. They had targeted these officers specifically. All 3 had been part of the case that put their father in prison. He had been convicted of first-degree murder after the death of a coworker and given life without parole. Despite stacks of evidence against him, he maintained he was innocent. His son stood by him all through the trial. They had hoped the judge would consider his lack of priors and be lenient on him. Instead, she threw the book at him. The brothers tried to stay positive, but as the years passed, they became bitter and desired revenge. They would wisely do what their father refused to do and accepted a plea deal. Not only would they avoid the death penalty, but both would have the chance of parole after 30 years. Such a decision was not popular among the city's law enforcement, but the furor would eventually die down and life would return to normal. Although we were almost sure our business had been destroyed, once the facts of the case came out in the press, we were able to recoup most of our lost income. There was a period there where we began discussing our options. Being so close to those incidents made us fear our neighbors and question if we wanted our kids to be exposed to such violence. After things bounced back, the discussion got put on the back burner but never truly went away. We managed to survive the crisis of 2008 and make a good living for ourselves. In 2016, we had our first child and were looking forward to a bright future. All of this went sideways when the pandemic began and unrest broke out everywhere. Then, a neighborhood less than a mile from the bar was burned by rioters last month. The discussions of 2005 were revived, and in short order, we chose to sell the bar and get out of Dodge. Here in our new home, life is much slower. People are far kinder, and all this confusion seems to be a world away. I pray for the sake of my son and the child I'm currently carrying, that things stay that way. After 10 years and multiple deployments throughout the world, I finally decided my time as a soldier was over. I'd been injured more than enough. I was done with all the excitement and just wanted a quiet place to live out my days. For the time being, I was single. I didn't have some female nagging me about her dream house or the best place to raise kids. My options were wide open. Or so I thought. I had no idea how hard it would be to find a small place in a quiet little neighborhood. Over 6 months and countless numbers of calls and hours of driving around, I thought I'd finally found it. I spoke to the owner, and she agreed to show me around the apartment. It was a 1,000 square foot, single-floor apartment tucked away near a wooded area. We met up, and after talking numbers and filling out papers, we were nearly done. Then out of the blue, it all went south. While looking over the paperwork, she noticed I'd been in the Army. She brought it up, and I answered truthfully, never expecting there to be a problem. We never should have been over there in the first place. I bet you've killed civilians and don't even feel bad about it. I won't rent my property to any baby killers. You can forget it. I didn't know what to say. For a second, I thought I'd gone back in time to the 60s. She sounded like a hippie ranting about Vietnam. My dad had told me a few stories of how they were treated when they came back, but I had no idea there were still folks that thought like that. There was little I could do about it. Arguing with a kook like that is a waste of time. I thanked her and resumed my search. Another month passed, and I was starting to regret my decision. It didn't matter where I lived at this point. I just wanted a roof over my head that was in my name, and I wanted it now. I took the next place and moved in right away. It actually wasn't that bad. The neighbors seemed nice, and I didn't hear any gunshots at night. The only negative was a big one. The back of my house shared an alley with a bar. Perhaps if there had been a tall privacy fence between us, I wouldn't have been concerned, but there wasn't. I could see the back of the building, and the patrons could walk right onto my property. Luckily, I only had this problem twice. The first time, I noticed movement in my backyard. When I went to check it out, I found some drunk guy pissing in my bushes. I asked him to leave, and he apologized. That ended with no problems. The second time would be far different. Despite being a fairly popular place, the bar wasn't very noisy. Besides the occasional screeching tires, I had no complaints. One cool spring evening, I had the windows open enjoying the nice crisp breeze. I was kicked back in my recliner watching a movie when I began hearing a woman scream. It got louder and louder until I began hearing banging on the back door. I peeked out and saw a woman yelling her head off and pounding on my door. I wasn't sure what to do. I knew this was sometimes a ploy to get you to open the door so you can be robbed. Something told me this lady wasn't acting. Just in case, I grabbed my gun belt and put it on. I slowly opened the door and scanned the yard for any hidden attackers. Once I was satisfied, I stepped out from the house and tried to calm her down. She begged me to help her. At first, I couldn't figure out from who, but soon enough I got my answer. A tall, skinny guy in an oversized t-shirt and saggy pants came jogging up to us. He didn't say anything but, "I'm sorry," and reached for the girl. I instinctively rested my hand on my gun and told him to stop. "Ma'am, do you want to go with this gentleman, or do you want me to call the police?" She didn't say anything, but I could tell by her eyes she was terrified. Mr. Hip Hop tried to convince me she was just drunk. He grabbed her again and tried to escape. He only got a couple of steps before I caught up. I yanked his arm and he lost his grip. The lady broke free and fled back toward my house. I told her to wait inside while I spoke to the boyfriend. He didn't seem very interested in talking, though. He began walking back toward the house, but I stepped in front of him. I told him to calm down and go home. I couldn't see any marks on her face, so I assumed they just got into a heated argument and she panicked. I was doing all I could to defuse the situation, but he just wouldn't listen. Things got worse when he told me to mind my own business and swung at me. I dodged the punch and grabbed his arm. I spun him around and tried to pin it behind his back. He must have had some training because he knew how to avoid it. He got loose and lunged for me. Before he got too close, I cracked him on the chin. He stumbled and fell. I thought he was done, but instead, he sprang back at me. I avoided him just barely. As he landed, I saw the glint of something in his hand. I wasn't positive it was a knife until later, but I wasn't taking any chances. The fight had taken on a whole new level of seriousness, and I wanted it to end immediately. Before he could regain his footing, I punched him again and again. He was a tough fellow and didn't go down until the fourth or fifth hit. He was on his back panting, but he still wasn't done. He'd raise his right hand, so I'd smack him again. As long as he had that knife, I knew I was in danger. I started to get mad and lost control, punching him over and over. I don't even know if he was moving anymore. I continued hitting him until the woman ran up and begged me to stop. She was crying, asking me not to kill him. I snapped back into reality and stopped. My hands were bloody and hurt like a mother. Even after all that, he still had that blade in his hand. For all of our safety, I pried it out and threw it into the bushes. Fortunately, I hadn't killed him. He did look pretty beat up, though. I figured I better call 911 before he did die on me. Seeing the very same woman I just tried to help right away with the man she'd been running from will stick with me forever. I will never understand why women act the way they do. The cops were surprisingly understanding considering the situation. The guy already had a history of knocking women around, so they didn't think I'd face any charges. Nonetheless, I was on pins and needles for nearly 6 months waiting to see what would happen. I finally got the call, and I was okay. To say I was relieved would be an understatement. A sadly humorous little postscript to this story popped up that summer. I was flipping through the paper one morning and a picture on the weddings page caught my eye. The couple looked very familiar. After a little reading, I knew why. The happy couple turned out to be none other than the two I'd had the run-in with the year before. I wish I could say I was surprised, but seeing the way she acted that night, nothing would shock me. Oh well, I wish them good luck. Hopefully, they won't be able to find me in my new place. I moved out into the middle of nowhere to get away from people like them. Whenever they do get drunk and fight again, I can only hope they find another idiot to bother. This guy has had enough. Until I graduated, I worked mainly temporary jobs. I didn't get my first real one until the week after. An advertisement in the one ad said that a restaurant/bar was looking for staff. When I inquired, I discovered I couldn't wait tables until I was 21. I thanked them and was about to leave when the manager mentioned they were also looking for a hostess. You weren't required to be 21 to do that job. My hopes were rekindled. The manager led me to a table, and we discussed the job. After an hour of asking questions, she hired me on the spot. My first shift was the next evening. For the first 4 years, I worked all the hours I could get, sometimes even taking morning dishwasher shifts. As my 21st birthday approached, the anticipation increased. The week leading up to it, I began training to wait tables and tend the bar. When the day came, I was ready. I worked the lunch shift 10 days straight before I worked my first shift tending bar. The following 2 years saw me doing much the same. Then one morning, my manager asked to speak to me. I was terrified I was being fired. Instead, she told me that the night manager was leaving. If I wanted her job, it was mine. It would mean more money for me and my daughter, but it would also come with a lot more responsibility. I had to think about it. After a restless night's sleep, I took the job and was named the new night shift manager. I had a lot to learn, and the next 2 weeks were a big blur. Although I'd worked at night before, I still felt somewhat out of place. I was fortunate to have an amazing staff to help me through any little hiccup I had. Bethany quickly became my favorite of them. She had the most bubbly personality of anyone I'd ever met. She got on some people's nerves sometimes, but I loved her. And the customers did too. She made out well on nights she waited tables, but anytime she tended bar, the place was packed. I had her in mind to replace me if I was to ever move up, but circumstances wouldn't allow that to happen. The spring of 2007 was the wettest I've ever seen. April through May was probably the worst. On the 17th, I'd been behind all day, it seemed. Under normal circumstances, I would have made it to work early. Unfortunately, the rains had caused several accidents on the highway, and I was running super late. Around 5:20 p.m., I'd made it within a mile of the bar. The street came to a standstill. I stepped out to take a look. Very close to where the bar should have been, I saw multiple sets of flashing lights. I figured it was just another wreck and prepared for a long wait. Fortunately, the police soon began directing traffic, and we started moving. When I reached the next intersection, I took a right and then a left on the next street. About 5:35, I finally parked and entered through the back entrance. I was surprised not to see anyone in the kitchen. Normally, the restaurant would be beginning the evening rush. Stepping out into the dining area, I was struck by an uncomfortable quiet. The place should have been noisy and active. As I turned the corner, I saw something I'll never forget. In the middle of our dining area sat a gray mid-sized SUV. A handful of firemen and paramedics were digging through the rubble. No one even noticed me at first. For several minutes, I stood frozen, taking in the utter destruction around me. At the front of the building where a big picture window once stood was a truck-sized hole. I could see several employees standing outside, a few crying and holding one another. I'm not sure how long it took before I was noticed by one of the service personnel. He asked who I was, and I told him. Then I asked him what had happened. He identified himself as a supervisor and asked me to join him in the kitchen. He did his best to give me a brief but thorough assessment of what had occurred and informed me that the store owner and manager were on their way to the bar. His description of the events made me shudder. From eyewitness descriptions, just before 5:10 p.m., a car came flying through the front of the building, finally coming to rest in the middle of the dining room. The driver, who had only minor injuries, stated that her SUV hydroplaned through the red light directly in front of the bar and crashed into the building. As it stood, several patrons had been injured, but none seriously. Unfortunately, 2 other patrons and 1 employee were still missing. When he told me the employee's name, my stomach dropped to the floor. While the search was underway, I did my best to calm everyone out front. Once the bosses arrived, I let them talk to the emergency services. My place was with the staff, but my heart was buried somewhere inside. Most of us were eventually allowed to leave, but myself and a couple of others stayed behind to await news on those still missing. As dark approached, the bodies were carried out one after another until just one remained. Just before 7, the last emerged, and all hope that our sweet Bethany had survived was snuffed out. The following months were the darkest of my life. Not only had the world been robbed of the most special human I knew, the future of the bar was unknown. Fortunately, the owners decided to rebuild, and about 4 months later, we were having our grand reopening. That evening, just before the doors were opened, a short ceremony was held to remember the 3 victims of the crash. I was lucky enough to be the one chosen to hold Bethany's photo. Later that night, the photo was hung in a place of honor on the back wall of the bar. I loved the idea of her always being there with us, and I'm sure she would have been overjoyed to be remembered in such a loving way.